welcome to the 83rd town hall. It's hard to believe that that's how many we've done, but that's where we are. My name is John Best, and with me, as always, is Mike, the man.
Hello.
We're going to go over just a little bit here before we get rolling. We'll move on to the next one here. Let's save time for the guest. All right. So as always, I'll start off here. CUNA. Do you know what CUNA is, Mike? You ever been to a CUNA thing?
I have. I love their events. Very good. They put on talk about putting on a good event. As Stan and I were talking, they put on good events as well.
They do. They're not the Masters, at Augusta, but they still put on an excellent event. So
I agree.
I will actually be this month at the HR and something conference in Orlando on the 26th, speaking in the morning. I'm doing, my speech is chicken soup for the HR soul. That's what I'm going to do. So, because I feel like HR people are just, I'm surprised more of them just don't lose it and run away. I mean, we all yell at them and yeah, it's never good for those guys.
Well, so especially in today's environment with this really kind of unique as I'm
wear a mask,
quoting,
wear a mask,
labor market and stuff. Oh my gosh.
I don't want to be vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. I can't even imagine. Yeah. So yeah. CUNA. That's what I say.
Good job. Yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk about correlation?
Sure. Hey, John, have you ever been sitting around in your robot room and one day you're just like, you know what? I want to start a credit union. And to start a credit union,
you need a robots.
Processor. What's that?
Robot credit for robots, because robots.
Yeah, credit for robots. That's your field of membership, robots.
Yeah.
So you're like, gosh, I need a core processor for this credit union. Well, you may not have to look any further than correlation, because they're obviously open architecture. You can plug and play pretty much any third-party vendor out there, and just good folks working there. So yeah,
all except for Jeff Dent, right? You still have the restraining order against Jeff.
Yeah, except for Jeff. Yeah, he's no, Jeff's a good guy.
That's depends on define good, but yeah, okay.
He's good.
Hey, guy. Speaking of good guys, have you ever heard of Member Pass? You ever call into the credit union and you spend all this time, answering questions, what kind of underwear are you wearing? It's weird stuff. I don't like the questions they ask anymore. I think it's very rude of them. But we could fix all that. You can just pick up your phone and answer the question. That's all it would take. You could just, go, hey, we're going to send you this. We say yes, and boom, you're in. It's magic. It's amazing. And it's about to do some really cool stuff with home banking. It could be used at the teller line. It could be used everywhere. Heck, you could use it to get in the front door of your house if you really wanted to. And I'm being honest about that because it's an open technology. It's created on something called Sovereign, which is a standard being used across a whole lot of organizations, banks, and other folks. So if you want to learn more about it, go to Bonify, bonify.com, BONFI. You know why? Because your credentials need to be, go with me, Mike, Bonafide. That's right.
I like it.
That's right.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Yep. Hey, you know what else? You know what the most amazing site in the planet is if you're a Canadian person?
Best Innovation Group.
No, it's Sugg Broadcast. It's amazing. There is how many videos are out there? I was thinking about this yesterday. How many videos are out there?
You want to know? Over 5,000.
Over 5,000 videos. Yeah. We just crossed 500 on the podcast. Lynn and I did. And this is 83 on the town hall. And somehow you have put 5,000.
Yeah, I think we're approaching 5,500 somewhere in there. Yeah. So
and what's it, 1,000 a week or?
It seems like it sometimes.
But anyways, a lot of amazing stuff, incredible things to go see. If you're not visiting Sugg Broadcast, then you're not up on things. That's all I got to say.
Well, thanks, John. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And if you're not using the folks at Best Innovation Group, you're not up on things either, especially in the fintech world. So go check out the fine folks at Best Innovation Group.
What if you're Chris Odie?
What's that? I see Chris down there. Yeah.
Yeah. What if you are him? Like, what do you do then? There's probably
I would definitely call Best Innovation Group.
That's probably a longer discussion.
You got to have internet to go to Sugg Broadcast, right?
No. All you need
sometimes
is a in a can.
Or you just go to a conference and we might be there as well. So,
can you send him another USB stick of your stuff? Okay.
Yeah. I'll put all 5,000 videos on it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get rolling. We're excited today. And Glenn, I'm going to let you introduce our guests. And by the way, with us is our third sort of de facto host that we sometime, and he's coming to us from like in the mountains somewhere. Apparently he rented some sort of castle at the top of a mountain. And also my partner for the podcast, Glenn Servati. And so Glenn's going to lead this one today. We're very excited to go through these things, but Glenn, you want to take us through this?
Sure. And yeah, greetings from Blue Ridge, Georgia, where it was supposed to be a really nasty storm right about now. And I was worried about my connectivity, but the sun is out. So once again, you can never really know exactly what to expect with the forecast. Scott wants some moonshine. I'm actually stopping for some hard cider the second this call ends. So I'll bring
No, he
some
wants
back
the real
for you.
stuff, Glenn. You need to find some dude in the side of the road who's selling boiled peanuts and moonshine. That's how that works, buddy.
Boiled peanuts?
Oh,
Is that boiled
that's
peanuts?
regular down here. Absolutely. I
Boiled
don't like
peanuts
them,
is
but
a
it's regular.
thing.
I've been in San Diego way too long, so I apologize.
Well, we've been looking forward to having Stan Viner on the call for some time because I think this is a really interesting kind of convergence of worlds that I think Stan can shed some really valuable light on for all of us. The background, you can read what's on the screen already, but the real key here is that Stan spent, I believe it was 28 years, if I'm not mistaken, at Jack Henry and Associates. And
144 quarters, because I counted every one of them.
Now that's impressive.
so
Is that like
Yeah,
on a
when
wall
you do-
somewhere
when
where
you
you
do
just mark off
sales,
each day? Like
Well,
a
when you
prisoner?
do, when you head up sales, that's what happens every
That's
quarter.
So, yeah, and one of the things we've talked about is, the perspectives, because, we are usually coming at it from a fintech perspective. We've got the credit unions out there, but we have not really talked as much from the actual service provider perspective, especially some of the legacies, the core providers, et cetera. And I think it would be a great opportunity that Stan has agreed to share some of his perspectives of, having been in the trenches and been on the other side of the table of those conversations for 28 years, and really how to optimize the relationship between the two so that people really understand where the other side is coming from. So that's, and as I said,
So this is going to be like a therapy session.
I'm not going to read the bio, but I'm sorry, what was that?
So it's gonna be like a therapy session for like for vendors and credit unions. I like it. Like, how do you feel about that, Stan? And then we'll ask Jim. Hey Jim, we just go back and forth, and at the end we'll give them some exercises to do. There's a couple books I'd like them to read. So,
oh, good. I was about to ask if we had a second slide because I didn't want to have to cut in and do a second introduction later. This actually, I think, ties in very nicely for those who joined us for our anniversary episode 2 weeks ago around Jim Stickley and breach and security and all the things going on there. Heather has agreed to share some thoughts with us based on her experience in the communications field about how to deal with disclosures. We all know that there are two types of institutions: those who have had a breach and those who are about to be breached or just don't realize they've been breached already. So from that standpoint, everybody has to be ready with a communications plan. And she's agreed to share some thoughts along those lines, which I think kind of dovetail nicely with some of what Stan has to say. And as I say, kind of ties back nicely to what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. So with no further ado, let me turn the mic over to Stan. And as always, we love for these to be interactive. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that. But we'll also leave plenty of time at the end for our usual, hopefully very interactive discussion. But with that, Stan, please take it away.
Thank you. Well, I just had to use one of my business recovery plans since my Bluetooth just ran out, so I had to go to my plan B. So certainly look forward to our conversation today. I have attended two of these, so apparently I have 81 of them to catch up on. So look forward to being certainly involved today and having a conversation that quite frankly doesn't take place enough. What I'll do is kind of go around 4 different categories. I've actually taught this this information at the Graduate School of Banking in Denver in a couple of summer sessions. So we certainly don't have the time to get into real deep areas, but let's make sure we get the big questions out there. And that is, what is at stake? So I will be referring to notes to make sure I don't miss anything real material. And what should your vendors be doing as part of the relationship? And by that, we're not talking about just core vendors. We're talking about your payments vendors and any of what you would consider to be your top 3 vendors. So let's expand this beyond just the core vendors. You may use a core vendor for those 2 or 3 top items. However, you may have a core vendor, a payments vendor, and a heavy digital vendor. So I think all these are probably in play for all that. And then what items are in your court? Where is your responsibility? Yes, you are the client. There's no question about that. But just as it is with your members and your corporate accounts, if you offer corporate lending, the more involved a member is, the better service you're able to give them. That's just all part of it. And we're going to end up on an unusual topic, and that is that time sometimes can be your enemy. And that is the fact that the longer you have been a customer can mean that you know the least about the system as someone that just converted. It's an amazing thing. We tend to kind of think, well, we've been using this core system for, I don't know, 17 years, 27 years, 7 years. We know everything about it. Well, as soon as you make that statement, then start realizing that you might be in this category. I think it's real key there. But it's under the what at stake category. So let's look about technology is going to be your second or third largest non-interest expense, depending on your number of branches, et cetera. We know the HR side is our largest non-interest expense. And by the way, I do sit on a bank board, in full disclosure, in Denver. Our bank's about 1.4 billion in assets. And we ask these same questions at the board level as well. Also remember that your credit union's brand is now heavily attached to your technology backbone. So I would ask that, are you in your mind's eye, not just digital, but also in other areas, are you feel like that your brand is certainly being, shown the best light by your relationship with your vendors? And also remembering that a non-aligned relationship can cause a major disruption. And we can talk about that in just a moment. But as we look about what should your vendor be doing, I think it's certainly important. And we know now that certainly that COVID's over. Be sure to get back involved, get back in the user conferences. Certainly the WebExes have continued, but I would really encourage you, if you feel appropriate and it is in your policy to travel, that's certainly your decision. But educational events are very, very important. And yes, while we can do a lot of these digitally, some of them are much more effective in person. Also, your vendor should be offering high-level training for your C-level executives. And instead of maybe just IT, maybe just line of business, you should also be seeing your vendor, again, any of your payment vendors or your core vendor, offer some type of training and some type of executive type sessions for the C-level people at your institution. Again, this may not have anything to do with the product that they offer, but they should be showing leadership by offering this not only to the IT side and the business side, but also the executive side. And quite frankly, they should be reaching out to you for input. Hopefully, you're finding that to be the case. If you are on a vendor that is no longer marketed, this tends to be more of a challenge. Some of you may be on a platform that, although there are hundreds of credit unions on it with you, is no longer part of your vendor's marketing portfolio, and you really have to be extra diligent in those areas as well. Your vendor should also offer through APIs. I know that's Best Innovations, one of their great things they do well. And that is they offer integration and to be a partner to other vendors. If you notice that your vendor is defensive, or your vendor or your core provider isn't offering the appropriate level of integration and partnerships, you should be asking questions about that. Those are very important items. Other things you should be doing, they should be doing for you, is offering on-site checkups at your credit union. If that isn't taking place, again, now that COVID's over, hopefully that will start happening again. I would also tell you that if you've never been to the home office visit, wherever your vendor might be or wherever your application is supported, great time to consider doing that, and they should be offering that to you. Real interesting quote I'll read from the president of Jack Henry Banking, Stacy Zingle, and I think it's very appropriate for our audience today. We always tell our customers and prospects that we can either be a business partner or we can be a vendor, but we are better as business partners. A vendor provides components in the strategic direction, but doesn't necessarily know the strategy, and thus limiting their input and assistance. Business partners, however, share their vision, they lock arms together, and they achieve success by executing strategy. There is a big difference And we all know the non-interest expense part of it here, but I guess I would ask you to do a self-check. And are you in a partnership relationship? Are you in a vendor relationship? And you can change that with interaction. Items that are in your court. What are the things that you can do to improve the communication side? Well, first and foremost, demanding accountability, I think, is real key. And that is making sure that if there are things that you have heard over and over again that your payments vendor has promised to do, let's make them accountable. Let's make sure that someone brings that up to the table. And I would also tell you, items in your court is showing up instead of just being a digital attendee, or minimally certainly being digital, but certainly in person and being very, very active. And that, from a standpoint of, and Glenn, I think you and I were talking to some degree about this, or I was speaking with someone about it. And that is, if you notice user conferences this fall, that you're sending the exact same people that went to the other 5 user conferences before they stopped, consider something different. Considering sending people that have never been to the conference before, reaching into the line of business that's new, reaching into that new employee that quite frankly might enjoy an opportunity to learn. And I've had some institutions walk up and ask me, how do you keep people from attending that are not really going to be fully engaged? And my quick answer to that is just tell them that we'll be happy as a credit union to send you to the conference, wherever that may be. We just want you, when you come back, to give us a 30-minute presentation on what you learned. To me, if they're not willing to do that, then they're probably not going to be actively involved and engaged. That's accountability within the credit union. So what I've seen credit unions do and banks do is, about a week before attending a user conference, you guys know how large some of these are, to have a session before, and the 3 or 4 people that are going decide who's going where and who's going to be accountable and what those presentations are going to look like when they get back. It's a big investment. It's very, very important. And whoever you send needs to be involved when they get back. So as I would move farther into this conversations about items in your court, and that is, highly recommend that you have multiple contact points within your credit union. If you as the CIO, or you as the CFO, or you as the CEO, or you as the operations director over deposits or loans or whatever it is that you happen to do, if you're the only contact with that vendor, then you should really try to do your best to spread the contact out within the financial institution to at least 2 or 3 other people, other parties. You may decide to do something different. And I would also tell you that this enables the richness of the relationship. So if you've noticed that, hey, it's always me and I'm really the main contact, nothing wrong with being a main contact. My suggestion here is to spread out a little bit. And the same thing on that end. You should have multiple contacts at the vendor. You shouldn't just have one main person at name your vendor, 4 or 5 great options out there in today's world. You should demand that you know more than just your customer representative. You should know someone at the executive level, and certainly someone beyond just your main point of contact. Because if that person leaves XYZ vendor, then you've got a situation where you only have one contact point, and all those years of history are really, really challenging. Something I would recommend you putting in your vendor management system is a link to the investor news. Most of the vendors out there are public. Some of them aren't. The ones that are, investor news is a great place to get information for vendor management information. We're about to end up here, and I'll end up on the areas where if you're a good match for an application, again, those of you in commercial lending, if there's some items that you'd like to see in treasury management and other items like that, and you've got some clients that need that type of thing, if you have a good match, offer to be a beta site, offer to be a test site, and be active. Should you do this, don't be docile. I mean, they obviously have picked you for a reason. You've raised your hand, and it's because, from an SME standpoint, this was something you had a lot of desire to do. And if you have time, and certainly all of us are pressed for that, but a great investment is to serve on a regional user group. Yes, I know you're going to the national meetings, and again, those things could be quite large depending on the vendor, But if there is an area user group for your state or for your area, great place to get involved. And I would also tell you that one of the areas that I think is important is to offer to be a vendor host at some point in time when your credit union decided on this digital vendor, this payment vendor, or this core vendor. Some credit union somewhere likely hosted you. And I would recommend, if you feel comfortable, to raise your hand for that. Another area I think of extreme importance in today's world is when you do hire a consultant. I know the folks at Best are great at what they do. Make sure that you have a triangle relationship, and that is that you have a positive engagement between the credit union, the vendor, and the consultant. It's very, very important that we all realize that we're in this for the benefit of our longer term relationships. So I would always try to keep it that way. Our final topic, and that is that time can be the enemy. Are you just too comfortable? And this is an unusual comment. Sometimes the longer you've been with a vendor, the less you really know about the software, the further away you are from any formal education. For some reason, financial institutions in the U.S., and again, I know our bank's guilty of it, and I'm sure maybe your credit union may or may not be, we get caught in a generational training gap where we think because someone spent time 1 week before they left, then that person they trained knows about the software. Not necessarily so. Matter of fact, probably very, very unlikely. So you should consider at some point in time when you feel like appropriate and you have the budget to do so, is to do a reset. Have your vendor come back in and train you on the software that you use today. You probably have 25 or 30% more parameters in your software than you think you might, because the last time you looked, you were busy doing something else. There've probably been things added, especially during the COVID period of times, that you would like to find and use today. Your product offerings might be different, and the product sets and the parameters are just vast in these core systems. So kind of start at ground zero sometimes and think about, wow, we've been on this system 23 years. We haven't had any formal education in X years, 12 years, 2 years, 15 years, whatever. The longer that period of time is, the further away you are from any formal education. And I really encourage you, because of the investment that you're putting in this relationship, there is no better place to get your investment back than in your core system and knowing everything it can possibly do for you, because it impacts almost every single person at the credit union, every employee. Real important to also know that as people change jobs, make sure they're getting the proper education and training from the core vendor or the other major vendor. And always remember that your new employees that come in, unless you have a specific plan or you have an onboarding plan, sometimes they never catch up. And each year that goes by, your new employees know less and less because they were not trained in any formal way. That's really kind of a blow through of what ordinarily takes almost 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes to go into depth with. But those are some highlights of some best practice that I've seen in my 30 plus years of working with literally hundreds of banks and credit unions, and the people that do the things that I thought were very helpful from a vendor perspective to include that relationship, and things that I saw banks and credit unions that felt like they might could be better at. So we'll turn it back over to, I guess, Glenn to open up the Q&A. And if not, we'll go over to Heather. I would mention to you that last week when I was attending the town hall, you guys were talking about cybersecurity and the things that take place. And we were talking about, even if you're in the cloud, obviously you have to be concerned about this, because many things that take place for business interruption, you don't have any control over. But the item that I'd like for Heather to talk about is what happens when one of those things happen, be it fire, be it tornado, be it flood, be it pandemic for that matter, but certainly an intrusion or ransomware, et cetera. When that reporter sticks a microphone in the wrong person's face, have you thought through that? I know that we've done a great job as an industry learning how to recover when we don't even have branches, when we don't have employees. We've been through that. We now got muscle memory. I'm not talking about that. Business recovery is real critical, but I'm talking about more, how do you discuss how you recovered? And this can be a big impact on your brand as to how you respond to the press. But before we do that and hand that over to Heather, Glenn, I would open it up for any Q&A from your side.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks so much, Stan. Why don't we hold, I mean, please, anybody who's got anything, let's, start collecting questions in the chat. I'd prefer kind of let Heather go through her piece and then we'll go through all of them.
Okay.
The one thing that you did mention that I really strikes home with me is the idea of continuing to retrain.
Yes.
Fact that, if you've, we know this stuff, we've had it in place for 20 years. No, the 20-year-old version. You don't know today's version.
That's correct.
I always think back to the day that, when I started out at the Federal Reserve Bank, I don't even know that we were using Lotus 123, but Lotus 123 was the, kind of the standard for spreadsheets. And then, over time, it turned into Microsoft Excel. And I had a friend who became a product manager at Lotus 123, and he went nuts. Or she actually, it was a woman that, everybody just got so used to, okay, look at all this great stuff the Microsoft Excel does. She goes, 123 does that too. They just don't realize it because
it has been for years.
It wasn't in that version. Exactly.
Yeah.
And John, I just also wanted to just check in. You had made a comment to me earlier today with regard to breaches and whatnot. You said that there was a comment from the government that we very narrowly had escaped, that the Russians did actually try an intrusion that was disclosed recently.
During the sanctions discussion this morning, Merrick Garland mentioned that they had stopped a cyber bot fleet. Basically, that Russia was, well, they said Russia actually specifically. I'm always like, well, is it? But this time they were pretty much saying it was state actors. That they were planning on turning loose, which, as big as it was, there was an instance of something along this lines about 10 years ago. It brought down a good chunk of the internet. It was the most bandwidth anybody had ever seen. It took down two major DNS suppliers and a couple other people. Twitter was off, like gone. So was Amazon. I mean, so yeah, it was pretty important what they just stopped. So that was, another sort of, I thought was interesting that it, happened today, but that's been happening a lot whenever I speak. I just spoke for Lou at PSU, and they instantly had some crypto fraud that had happened for the Ukraine and other things, people trying to scam people out of money. So there's a lot of that going on.
And which is, again, perfectly timely for, Heather's, we dodged this, but it's out there. So Heather, if you could weigh in, because it's going to happen at some point. And if it doesn't, thank your lucky stars. But
Heather,
ready.
Heather wins for best background. I can't tell if that's real. I'm
It's
thinking
real.
it is.
That's real.
You
You
seriously.
can thank my husband for this.
That's no garage. That's all I'm saying. Mike.
Sorry.
Yeah, but
I put him to work.
Definitely wins.
But like you said, and like Glenn said, we are all going to face some type of business interruption. And we pray that it won't be something on a massive scale. But you saw even the best Amex cards were down for a while already this month. We see it happen all the time. And how you manage it is protecting your brand from a communication standpoint. There's a lot to protect in what you do. So looking at business interruptions, widen your mind frame as we had this conversation. We're not just talking about data breaches, but like Stan said, it could be a natural event. We could have downtime across the enterprise or just across some of your payment systems. How you handle it is what's going to be most important for keeping your brand reputation, letting your members know that you're really out there to protect them and in their best interest. No matter what is hitting you, you're out there for them and on their side. So it ebbs well into what Stan's talking about with working with your vendors, because a lot of this has to be done with your vendors. You should be speaking with them. They offer all kinds of resources for this. You should be able to have crisis communication drills with them, where you can come with your crisis comms team and sit in a room and go through step by step what's going to happen in real time. So say initially you realize there's a ransomware incident. What's your first response? And then they roll out the next step. You're already seeing activity on social. How do you respond to your members there? They're Facebooking you and asking you questions. So going through these drills will really help you pinpoint what your weaknesses and strengths are and what you would improve in a real scenario. It's just as important as laying out the plan. NCUA offers a whole toolbox of resources. So making sure you have all those connections with your regulators and your vendors, everyone across the board, is number one step to getting prepared and knowing what's available to you. If you haven't already gone through your plan with everything that's happening again with Russia, go through it again, freshen it up, make sure you're on top of it, and that everyone knows their roles. And what Stan said earlier with new employees and training, there might be people in your credit union that don't know what the plan is, and people at different roles and positions that don't know what their role is. So it's not only important that your executive suite know, but you should have your branch managers, everybody know what to do in their unique position. Even, the tellers need to know that they can't speak to their friend that's a reporter about the details of what they might hear, even if it's off the record. Little things that you're making sure are prepared. It should be part of your basic HR training and employee onboarding too. So the reason why we encourage so much preparation is because when this does happen, when any type of disaster happens, it happens very quickly. You know the regulations right now. You've got Graham Leach Bailey just saying that when you do know about an incident, you need to let the regulators know as soon as possible. But we know that timeline might be shortening. We've seen already the banks are faced now with something that goes into effect next month, having a 36-hour window to notify. So we might have really tighter constraints than what you're used to, and you need to be prepared. I would start measuring with little things that happen. What is my response time? What in these drills would our response time be? How fast are we moving on these things? With all that considered, I'll roll through a plan, all the steps that you should have in your plan to make sure as you go through it, as you review these things, there are 10 basic pieces that you need to have included to make sure that we're not making mistakes. And time again, I can't say everyone should know what's happening in this plan. Nobody can act as an island, because you've probably already seen incidences where your digital banking team might be reaching out to members and saying, oh, our systems are down. People need to know enterprise-wide what's happening there. They can't be acting on their own. Your marketing person can't be acting on her own, saying, I'm sorry, our cards are down right now. It needs to be evaluated on a larger level. So identifying the crisis is where we start. We need to know exactly what happened. We need to know what the issue is at hand, what the scope is of it, make sure that we are aware of what we're addressing. From there, obviously, start monitoring immediately. You're going to see things coming across social, coming across the news. You're gathering your team all at the same time as step 2. So who you want in this team, we talked about making it broad, but include your execs, get legal involved, heads of departments that might be relevant. In different scenarios, you may have different heads of departments coming in to help. Marketing and communications, please involve them. They will be able to help make this the best message it can be. Regulators, of course, we already talked about having them involved very, very quickly. So it might be different based on the scenario that you're facing. Some things are going to have to move faster. You're not going to have an off-color remark or a racist remark have the same full-blown plan as you might with a full-blown systems down. So just know the scenario and plan for different scenarios, and you might have different tracks that happen for the severity of each issue. Another thing people don't always consider, you've got this team, you know you need the CEO and X, Y, and Z players, but what happens if one's not available? A lot of times you might have someone on a flight and things and decisions need to be made. Have their backup, have a backup plan, and have a plan for your backup plan. So as these evolve, your next step is going to be determining the appropriate message. What are you addressing here? So let's narrow down the ideas. What is the scope of the incident? It's important to be able to address if there was a breach, if it was a small breach. Let's say that there was an incident that involved only 150 members. Make sure we're not blowing out of proportion if we don't have to. People are going to react as wildly as you would imagine. So determining the scope of everything is important. Determine the risk to your members. They want to know. That's all they care about. As we're planning your communication strategy, what does this mean to me? Am I losing money? Is my account vulnerable? How can I pay my bills if things are down? What do I need to know about this? And how are you protecting me as a credit union and as my credit union? So talk about the corrective actions you're already taking. If it's not an open scene anymore, it's just say it has been closed down. We are addressing it. We are going to circle back to you. Let them know to minimize and contain the situation as much as you can. but the whole time being very careful not to make any statements that are you can't commit to. So when systems are down or any pieces things down, just saying, we're fixing this for you right away. Be careful about your time, only what you can control. So other active things to consider is if you need to involve law enforcement, you can do this in your time. Consider that. If you decide you want to file charges, you might want to wait until that Friday afternoon. You can even talk to your local law enforcement and say, I've got something I want to file, because once it hits that public record, then you're in the public with it. So make sure you're working on your time frame with legal and everybody else, but there are some factors there that you can control. Anything that goes public, you also want to be monitoring very carefully. So anything you send out to members to educate them, to your employees. We've seen what happened with Disney on a Zoom call being recorded. All of that can be leaked. Be careful with what you're saying, even in these internal processes and documents. It's all possible that it can get out. We're trusting our employees to do the best, and we're trusting them to follow our processes, but watch your wording and read it from the perspective of someone that might be an outsider trying to pick holes in this. Fair enough to say. Next, step 4 is you get your spokespeople together. So depending on the situation, that will determine your spokesperson. If you have a small local branch issue, you don't want a CEO speaking to it. That just elevates the issue to a bigger scope and bigger audience. So there are instances where we can just have the branch manager speak to something or someone local, and they should be prepared in those instances as well. We can target and modify based on who's being affected. If it's just a social issue, maybe we just address it on social. We don't have to magnify the scope, and we can be careful about how broadly we're amplifying this. Step 5 is have your FAQ. I like to make sure we are always considering the member and the employees here. Member and employee communications are going to be different. They have different concerns. This FAQ document will be given to your frontline staff to be able to answer basic questions. So I like to make sure you're running it by someone that hasn't been as in-depth in the situation as you have. You have been focused on this situation for the past 24 hours and know every living piece of it. Run it by someone that's been outside of the story, that they're hearing this for the first time. See what their initial reactions and questions are. That's going to help a lot in getting some of the questions that you're just too deep in the weeds to see at this point. So reaching out to members and employees is step 6, and make sure that you're reaching out to them where you need to be reaching out, but not elevating the situation. So be personable as you reach out. If it is a small instance and you can just address those 150 people, just address those 150 people. We'll keep the scope where it needs to be. Be understanding, be personable, be comforting with them. We want to avoid sounding like a machine as we talk to them. You want to make the statements easy, sound bites. I've seen a credit union on social, someone was complaining about their payments being down, and then on social, people are going to get weird. So you had someone joking around back there saying, well, what about my insert illegal illicit activity here? And they gave the same statement they're giving everybody else. We're sorry your funds were unavailable. We want to make sure we're being real here. We want to make sure that we're addressing things and it doesn't look like you're having an intern cut and copy everything. So be prepared for that as you're putting together your plan. Next, if media needs to be involved, determine if that's going to be a proactive or a reactive communication with the media. You can monitor and wait and see if they pick it up and address it then. Being available for them, though, and making sure that we are always available can help a ton. I've seen stories turned around completely by just inserting and providing a quote. So you don't want to just block them all off, but you want to make sure that your local branch manager is not out there answering questions on the local TV station all by himself without any guidance. They should all be aware. Local media does care. And you should have relationships with all of them already, too. So that's important in your communication and in this strategy to consider that. So preparing for communications on step 8, we need to make sure that when we don't have answers, people know how to follow up. We need to make sure that all that FAQ is available. We need to make sure people know that, you can say, I don't have the answer to that. We're investigating. I will get back to you. Providing timelines if the situation is very urgent help. I will provide an update at every 4 hours until this is resolved. Providing anything you can in detail to show your concern and show your action is going to help you as you get out there in front of the public at this stage. And then continuing to track media coverage. at the end of this, the last step is to evaluate how everything went. Whether you're doing a drill through this scenario or whether it was a very small crisis involving one employee that went rogue, see how your flow went through this and go ahead and reflect back, see where you can make your improvements. I think the small crisis scenarios are the best for this. It's a great practice to run through the drill. You might say, we didn't need to go through all of this. This story never hit the press, it never came out. But you got to practice your scenario and you got to practice it in real time and get everyone involved and comfortable in the process so that if the big scenario does hit, you are prepared, you're comfortable, you've been through this and you understand how it works. So I will hand over to you, Glenn, see if there's any questions or anything else you want to talk.
One thing that really jumped out at me that I really hadn't thought about before, which is always a great thing, regardless of whether it's crisis communications or whatever. I love that point about getting somebody who's not in the weeds and kind of road testing the message with them, because it's so easy when you're that close to it to just assume some things are known that aren't, or you might just totally miss an angle that the person in the street might really jump into. So I really like that one a lot. If people aren't following along on the chat, there's a couple of interesting things if people want to weigh in about how many credit unions out there on the call actually have already convened a formalized crisis communication team. It'd just be interesting to see some kind of interaction on that one. And also any other questions. There's a great question for Stan here I'm going to raise in a second. But first, Heather, just since your comments are fresh in our mind, one thought I had is, you've got a couple of different audiences when you talk about a broadcast message through the media or whoever. Then you've got the frontline staff who are more likely to get the direct question, whether it's over the phone or at the branch or whatever. How do you think about, getting a concise message to that group who then has to be able to convey it very crisply and consistently to the audience when it's not a single message that you can manage on an outbound basis because someone's reacting to a question?
Yeah, it's a great question. That FAQ helps tremendously. And I think making it easy, making it soundbite material where it's in your common vernacular and we're not complicating the process. They're not going to say anything that doesn't sound like they could come out of their mouth, or it's going to sound terrible if they're just reading it off the sheet like a robot. So making sure that you're considering the member, considering those situations, and making just clear sound bites that are helping with education for the member, helping to address what you're doing to help them. I think that's what your frontline staff are going to want to share. They're going to want to be comforting naturally. They want to help your member and be in there to support your community. And if you provide them with those tools in that FAQ, that goes a long way.
The other one's kind of the trade-off between speed and accuracy, because I know this is one that really vexes a lot of communications people because people want answers fast. The reality is not always clear. You get that slow drip, drip, drip where you say something and then it turns out that the facts shift a bit and then you look like maybe you weren't on top of things. So a couple of questions I had about trade-offs. One is the trade-off between that speed and knowing that you absolutely, if you wait till everything's locked down, you're gonna be waiting for weeks. On the other hand, there's that trade-off of keeping your customers informed, keeping them protected, and not freaking them out. So I mean, kind of both of those kind of trade-offs, how you think about managing them.
Right. And you can share on minimal scope, I think, to keep things safe and to be very protective over your members. So we understand that we have had something happen. We're investigating. Let members be on alert without freaking out about, hey, we've had this full breach. So just having them know if they see, that way they're looking and they might see something suspicious happen in their accounts, or they might know something. We want to make sure that we're protecting them first and foremost. But I think keeping it limited and being as concise as possible in the very beginning when you don't have all the details is important, because we really don't want to share any wrong or inaccurate information. And these things evolve. We learn so much as time goes on. So yes, absolutely consider the members and their financial health and first and foremost, and anything you can do to help them with education and awareness and knowing that you're out there in their best interest in mind.
Yeah, so great point. It's an art and not a science. That's definitely true. Sorry, John, go ahead.
That's okay. I really liked what you said, and it really occurred to me because this very program was started as a result of what the heck do we do when the pandemic hit? And I like what you said about we don't know what's around the corner, and it struck me right away, like, what could be the next thing? Like, the big thing was, oh my God, everyone has to work from home and they have to do it by tomorrow. What's after that? I guess everyone has to work from their car. And we have to have that ready by next week. And you laugh, but that could be a thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Well,
it could be that we need to have people.
It kind of was. I
mobile.
mean, we had the Chick-fil-A version of the branches where you had people with tablets going out trying to make sure that people didn't have to get out of their cars in the drive-thru.
It's so yeah. I mean, you know, anticipating. I think she makes a very good point on anticipating as best we can that next turn of events. But I think there's a guideline that we can use to say, okay, that post-mortem she discussed, it could be a good opportunity to do you know, we're getting to the point, Glenn, where maybe a good show would be to do a post-mortem on the pandemic, you know, to really kind of go over what were best practices, what worked, what didn't, because I think that could inform you know, a lot of what's going on. And then to Stan, I love your point about getting together in a conference, and I'll throw another one at you that I used to make. I did exactly what you said. You go to a conference, you're coming back and giving a presentation.
Yeah.
And then but the other thing we used to do was we used to look, because you can get who's going to be there, like for CUNA. We used to look through it for crayons that were on the same vendors as ours, as us, or someone we thought was doing something, and we would assign people to kind of go and, you know, hunt that poor person down. Your job is to track, you know, Mike Lawson through the hallways and stalk him until he tells you how they did, you know, instant issue digital credit cards, because we need to know that. And I would say that conferences, as valuable as they are, and your point about the vendors putting them on, and I love the partner concept. That was something Rob Guilford instilled in Kevin and I a long time ago. I think you knew Rob. But the idea that as you go along and you determine that there are people there who can help you, tracking those people down and assigning them and making those relationships, the conferences are almost the more valuable thing we learned from our AXFI conference. And Glenn, you and I used to talk about this, and I'm actually planning on revisiting that next year.
Good.
Is not AXFI, but something new. I have a new idea. But the idea that what happens out in the hallway is almost as important as what happens, you know, when you're sitting and listening to a speaker.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Well, it's because it's on point. It has something to do with the business problem, right? It has something to do with it's something you're trying to solve, and you're intensely interested in that because members are talking about it.
Well, yeah, and if someone else can crack that code, and you know, I heard this described. I was in a conference call with a friend yesterday, and we were trying to explain the difference between banks and credit unions in the sense of sort of how it appears to vendors. And he said, yeah, if two guys from a bank are at a conference and one of them asks, how'd you do that? You're not going to, they're probably, you know, given, sounds like we're in the same area. I'm in Colorado Springs, but they're not going to sort of share that information necessarily, maybe in the community banking space, but not as freely as we would in the credit union space. Whereas in the credit union space, the collaboration is sort of our number one opportunity.
Difference in culture.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing. And as a result of that, there's no reason to continue to reskin the cat or to reinvent a wheel. The other thing I was just going to throw out there, I really liked what you said about length of time on a project, and I'm going to add a little to that. What I find is over time, you configure and configure and configure, and I call it overly configuring. So you have this great system, maybe one of Jack Henry's system, Cruise or whatever, and over the years, people have done this and that and this and that and configured till the point where if someone said, "Hey, let's tear it down and start over," it'd be like, you ever seen that scene in Apollo 13 where they dump all the crap on the table and say, "We got to build one of these"? All we have is like a shoe and
this is all we got.
Yeah, it would be like that in a crisis, which kind of ties the two together because, you know, Heather, I think anticipating what these crises can be, and the fact that there's no doubt that one of Russia's number one targets, and we talked about this last week, they're under sanctions. There's no doubt that the leadership has unleashed them to go find money. North Korea has been doing that a long time. We're the number one state actors for sort of actually stealing things. There's a lot of people who hack stuff and do things for data, you know, but there's, you know, actually stealing money has been a little more rare, you know, but guess what? They're going to be unleashed, and especially after today. And the other thing is, why bang your head against Bank of America when you can go find insert credit union B here? And I think your point about being ready with that communication, who to talk to, why, how to talk about it. Because guess what? You're not going to find out about it from some formalized, you're going to find out about it from Twitter. And it's going to be like, there's this movie I watched called Eagle Eye, and the guy's sitting, and this happened to me once at the airport. We're all sitting there. This is when Southwest first started sending text, right? And we're all sitting in the airport, and I guess they changed the gate and they decided to text all of us that. You ever been sitting somewhere where everybody's phone goes off all at once, like for an Amber Alert or something? That's what it's going to be like at the credit union. And we, I think your point on understanding how to handle that in each medium is going to be really, really something people are going to have to do. Sorry, I hijacked this for a bit. I just have been making notes and decided I wanted to yak for a bit.
Well, I do think it's important what Heather pointed out there. And again, the convergence of these two pieces, be these three large areas: your digital vendor, your payments vendor, and your core vendor, some of which could be one in all three in one. But make sure they're at the table with you when you start doing some of these disaster preparation areas.
Yeah, the tabletop exercises.
Yeah, exactly. On the table.
Well, and really, they're the only ones that can tell you the scope of what happened. And more and more, and a great example of this, and Jim Stickley brought this up last week. If I'm a bad guy, I'm not saying I am, and I'm not saying I'm not, and I want to, why bother even going after the credit union when I can go after insert bill pay vendor here?
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And so looking for these one of many sources that could provide me opportunity for money. And so it's not necessarily you that's going to be hacked, and we've learned that over and over again. I remember the first time I got like some CAMS alerts. I'm sure the first time they copied the credit card, I would have loved to have been in that boardroom. I'm sure that they were like, shut her down. What? Yeah, we can't use credit cards anymore. They copied one. We're done. I have to find something new. Right. But now if you got a CAMS alert that said 4,000 credit cards were compromised, we call that a day that ends in Y. Right. So over time, people become normalized to this, but they're not normalized to things like the pandemic or a mass breach as it relates to trying to literally shut down the financial system.
But that's also why, like Stan said, you need those multiple points of contact at the vendor too, because you need to be able to, you as a credit union need to be able to go in and figure out what is happening and do that quickly. So I've had credit unions reach out to me on behalf of vendors I represent because they don't know who to talk to.
Right.
And that's fine, but that just wasted an hour of your time where there should have been a direct resource there. That you have.
It feels like it's kind of like a chess game, right? There are bishops and pawns. Like I'm usually a pawn. So I talk to my other pawn. He's the guy on the other side. But important people like Heather have a connection that's at the same level on the other side. And I usually encourage to have some sort of executive escalation contact as part of any vendor process. And I think the other thing you have to do is identify critical vendors, because frankly, none of us have the resources to do that for everyone. Yep. And so, when I hear these things, I think about the major digital vendors, but I don't know that everybody's sort of identified what the risks are. That's another thing that we've talked about, is doing a risk review of each vendor ahead of time to try to figure out what could go wrong and then how to react to it. And we started helping people do that with their tabletop exercises as well.
And you kind of get it, and I don't mean this literally, but you kind of get a mulligan if it's a tornado or a hurricane.
Back to the golf thing. I got you. You're working it back.
But if it's technology, I think your members expect you to be just all on top of that. And I think they're right. I think they're right. Yeah.
Their expectation is that they shouldn't hear it from the news.
Exactly.
And, we talked to a company, Glenn, who was that? Breach, the company was providing information about members that have been in breaches.
Breach Clarity, Breach IQ?
I think it was Breach Clarity, yeah. I thought that was a really cool service because I'd rather hear from a credit union than, my browser telling me that, you've got a password on a compromised list. What list? How'd you get a list? Where's the list? There's a lot of questions I have about that sort of thing.
They're part of Sontiq now, for what it's worth. I mean, they got acquired recently. I want to make sure Cody entered
Cody had a great question about integration. Go ahead.
Yeah, Cody had a question in the chat a while back, and I want to make sure, because we are running a little bit on the late side. And Stan, this one's for you. Going back to your comments, how do we deal with normalizing the data sets? And Cody, please feel free to unmute and elaborate. But I'm just kind of going back to your question in the chat. Given that you've got different vendors and different data sets coming in across multiple different sources, it can be very difficult to get those integrated. Any thought in terms of really providing a unified experience to the member as far as, across all these different vendors?
And I won't name any fintechs specifically, but there are 2 or 3 excellent fintechs out there now that are offering umbrella products that allow you to have a more integrated digital experience with multiple vendors. So you're not having to go find the app, right? You're not having to go out and say, okay, I don't have that app downloaded, but it allows the curve there. And certainly I'd be happy to take a phone call from anyone that would like to know some of those vendors' names. But I think they've seen that as a spot in the ecosystem that needs to be filled, because you do have these, number one, a member doesn't know what a core system is, doesn't care, and certainly doesn't know who you're on. They could care less. They just want to know what your employees can do for them, right? So I think you see this triangulation of that, and with the digital experiences, some of these fintechs are really getting good at this, Glenn.
That makes a lot of sense, and it ties into the whole point about APIs you made earlier in the process as well. I mean, a lot of this should be working a lot more, in concert with one another, and slowly but surely, I think we're getting there.
Well, the AI intelligent spots that are out there now, the ability for fintechs, and in some cases are very, very young with not, hundreds of employees, have really figured this stuff out, and they're pretty good at it.
Back to the earlier point, because I know we're down to the last 2-3 minutes, but JB, you made that comment about it'd be a great time to do a postmortem on the pandemic in general, and Heather, just given your feedback, it'd be great if you joined us for that one, because I think you might really bring some thoughts to the mix. I mean, I hate to jinx us and say, hey, the pandemic's over, let's go back and do a postmortem. I mean, we're still living through the long tail, but I think we have gotten enough.
It's through third variant, right?
Yeah. I think we've got enough learnings that it's time to really maybe take stock of where we're at. I would tend to agree with that.
I like it.
Well, and I would add one layer to that. How is what you learned in that area develop muscle memory of business recovery in other areas?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's good and bad muscle memory, right? Back to your golf.
Oh, there is that
too. And also, what was the organizational trauma? That's something I've been working on lately, is I find that at the core of a lot of things that are happening inside organizations, there's this organizational trauma that happened. And to your point, Heather, those are often related back to, some sort of vendor issue, or, I like your crisis management team, kind of a name, but this idea that happened. And then going forward, it creates fear within the organization of almost anything. It can almost be paralyzing, but that's a whole nother episode to talk about. I told you it was going to be creating therapy, vendors and partners and Crayons. We're right at time here, Glenn. I just want to take a moment and thank everybody, and also acknowledge that somehow Scott Mills had sent a message that he was on trial or something, and that apparently he was
jury duty.
Apparently he was found innocent or set out on bail or something, and it appears he's here now. So that's good. That's good. There he is at the scene here, just finding out or being served his subpoena, I think is what.
Is that like an illustrator's rendering in the courtroom? Was that?
I don't know. I think so. It looked like it. It looked like the
He
kind
can
of
only use that excuse once now. Right?
Yeah. Seen here testifying in Congress. All right. Well, as always, fascinating. This is definitely when I took a lot of notes. I think it's really, really good to look at these things. And Glenn, I want to thank you for really organizing this. And putting together,
well done,
despite
Glenn.
all the moonshine and the
boiled peanuts.
Boiled peanuts, yeah.
We'll have them ready for the 20th, and we have our next session in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're gonna give away some of those mute things, so be sure to show up and sign up.
I'll bring the boiled peanuts. We'll have a raffle.
We're gonna get you a mute button for sure. I've already got one on, being sent to you. So, all right, guys. Well, and I posted the article about the FBI disrupting the hackers. So before you go, if you want to grab the chat, I put that out there for anybody that's interested. Since we
cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. That was awesome. Well done.